Emergency blood needed, the nurse announced. Millionaire rushed in and saw his ex in labor with twins. Hey, beautiful souls. Welcome to Alcott Stories, where every tale touches the heart and every ending feels like a second chance. Tonight, we bring you a story that begins with heartbreak and ends with healing. A cold millionaire, a woman he never thought he'd love, and a hospital room where blood isn't the only thing that saves lives. Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your country or city in the comments below. I'd love to know where our story is reaching hearts tonight. So grab your tea, wrap yourself in a blanket, and let your heart open. Because this story, this one, might just stay with you forever. Damien Cole had never lost a deal, never lost a night of sleep, and certainly never lost himself to a woman. At 30, he had conquered Wall Street, bought penthouses with glass walls that kissed the clouds, and left a trail of broken hearts across every luxury bar in Manhattan. He didn't date, he sampled. He didn't apologize, he vanished. His world was one of sleek leather, crystal glasses, and fast exits. And above all else, he didn't believe in love. He mocked it. A slow disease for the weak-hearted, he called it. Something poor people cling to when they have nothing else to hold. Damien's tastes were as sharp as his suits. He preferred his women delicate, icy and pristine, models, heiresses, influencers. Always white, always hollow. They looked good next to his Lamborghini and made him look better on magazine covers. He had rules, rigid ones, and brown skin had never fit into the mold he carved for his world. Until that Monday morning. He walked into the cafe on the ground floor of his corporate tower, his domain, his skyline. He wasn't looking for anything more than caffeine and 5 minutes away from shareholder calls. The scent of roasted beans floated through the marble halls, mixing with the faintest trace of vanilla and cinnamon. But there was something else in the air that day, something that made time drag its feet. That's when he saw her. She wasn't trying to be seen. That made her impossible to ignore. She sat alone, tucked into the corner, wrapped in soft earth-tone layers, her skin glowing like bronze in the sunlight, pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her fingers curled around a chipped coffee cup, nails short, natural. Her eyes were locked on a faded notebook filled with inky swirls and sketches, biting gently on her bottom lip as she scribbled. It wasn't what she wore or how she moved. It was the stillness, the depth, the quiet defiance in her. Damien stopped mid-step, literally, one leg ahead of the other, completely still, as if his mind had tripped over her presence. His assistant, rambling behind him, fell silent too. "Sir?" she asked. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Something inside him, a muscle he never used, tightened painfully. She looked up. And just like that, something cracked. Her eyes. Large, lined with fatigue but burning with life. They weren't pleading for attention or asking to be saved. They were simply there, present, honest, and when they locked with his, she didn't smile, didn't flinch. She looked through him, like she saw the man behind the $1 million suit, and found him wanting. "Who is she?" he muttered, more to himself than to the assistant now fidgeting beside him. "I'm sorry, sir." "Nothing," he snapped, eyes still fixed. "Just go." His feet, as if detached from his ego, moved toward her, slowly. He wasn't sure what he was going to say. Damien Cole didn't approach women like this. He let them come, let them orbit him like moths to a flame. But this was different. She was not part of his script. She was not afraid of silence. And for the first time in years, he was. He stood near her table, heart uncomfortably loud in his chest. "I haven't seen you here before," he said, his voice smoother than he felt. She glanced up again, expression unreadable. "I just started last week," she replied, tapping her pen twice on the page. "Where do you work?" he asked. "Upstairs." "Graphic design contract. I'm sure you're important, but I don't memorize faces." The blow landed soft but firm. His lips curled. "I like that." "No nonsense." "You look like nonsense," she replied without smiling. He laughed. Actually laughed. Not the charming, hollow chuckle he gave at Galus, but a short, honest laugh. His throat tightened as he stared at her again. Something ancient and unfamiliar began scratching at the edges of his certainty. She closed her notebook. "Look, I don't mean to be rude," she said, standing. "But I've had a long morning, and I'm not interested in being someone's 5-minute curiosity." "I didn't say I was curious," he lied. "Yes, you did. With your eyes." She walked away, hips swaying with the confidence of a woman who'd survived things. More dangerous than a smooth-talking billionaire. He watched her go, not with desire, but with an ache. A question, a hunger not of the body, but of the soul. He sat down at her table, long after she'd left, and stared at her empty coffee cup. The smell of cinnamon lingered in the air, like a memory he hadn't made yet. "What the hell just happened?" he whispered. He didn't believe in love, but for the first time, he wanted to. He didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. Damien Cole, the man who once counted women like poker chips, sat in his penthouse, watching the sunrise spill over glass walls, thinking about a stranger with ink-stained fingers and a notebook full of mystery. The next morning, he ordered his team to pull up the list of new hires in the creative department. When he saw her name, Lena Monroe, his pulse kicked. Graphic designer, freelance, temporary. He whispered it aloud, like it was a secret spell. Something forbidden and electric. That day, he took his meetings 2 floors up just to walk past her desk. She was quiet, focused, headphones in, fingers moving in elegant swirls across a sketchpad. She didn't notice him or pretended not to, and something about that made his blood run hotter. By Thursday, he'd had enough. He waited near the elevator she took at 5:17 p.m. sharp. When the door slid open, there she was, tired eyes and paint on her knuckles. "You're too beautiful to sit alone," he said, leaning casually against the wall, giving her that trademark smile that usually melted resistance like wax. But Lena was not wax, she was fire. She blinked at him, slow and cool, then replied, "I wasn't waiting for company. But maybe I was wrong." That night, they met at a quiet rooftop restaurant that overlooked the city like a secret. The candlelight flickered against her skin, and Damien couldn't stop watching the way she chewed her lip before speaking, like every word had weight. "Why me?" she asked finally after dessert. "You could have anyone." He took a breath, uncertain of the truth himself. "I don't know." "You make the noise stop." Her brow furrowed. "What noise?" "The kind that follows you even in silence," he said. Her gaze lingered on him longer this time. They started meeting often, under the pretense of dinners, then drinks, then long walks that led nowhere but deeper into each other. The nights grew longer, and coffee dates turned into hotel keys, exchanged like secrets. He learned that she was raised by her grandmother, loved jazz over pop, painted to feel, and hid pain behind sarcasm. She learned that behind Damien's arrogance was a graveyard of buried trust, betrayals, and a boy who grew up learning never to need anyone. One night, lying on a bed tangled in white linen, he stared at her as if memorizing the lines of a prayer he never knew he needed. "I don't believe in love," he murmured, voice barely audible. "But if I ever did, it would feel like this." Lena didn't smile. She didn't say, "I love you" back. She just reached for his hand and placed it on her chest. "Feel that?" she whispered. "That's real." He swallowed hard, something raw pressing behind his ribs. There was no talk of the future, no promises, just the kind of intimacy that felt more dangerous than lust, vulnerability. She never asked him where they stood, never demanded to be labeled. That scared him more than anything, because he started needing her without realizing it. She became the part of his day that felt still, human, grounded, and that terrified him. Because Damien Cole didn't fall. He controlled, conquered, consumed. But with Lena, he was simply a man, wanting. Her laugh stayed with him like perfume on skin. Her voice echoed in his dreams, soft and unfiltered. She'd say things like, "I don't want to fix you, Damien. I just want you to stop pretending you're not broken." He would pretend not to hear, but her words left dents, deep ones. Even in his boardrooms, he'd find himself thinking about the way her hair smelled, like cocoa butter and sea salt. Once she painted a canvas of his hands while he slept beside her. She told him she did it because his hands looked like they've both built and destroyed things. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he kissed her instead. Passion turned into softness. Touch became language. With Lena, even silence made sense. But as the weeks passed, an unease began to crawl beneath his skin. He'd lie to himself, say she was temporary, just another chapter, but a voice he couldn't silence whispered, "What if she's the ending you've been afraid of?" He saw her brilliance, her patience, her warmth, and instead of gratitude, fear grew. Because loving her meant changing. It meant vulnerability. It meant truth. And Damien had lived too long behind walls he'd sworn never to tear down. And still, every time she looked at him like he was something worth believing in, those walls trembled. The season changed, but he didn't tell her goodbye. No final look, no apology, no reason, just absence, sudden and hollow. One morning, Lena woke to sunlight filtering through her curtains, reaching across the sheets to find him, and touched only the cool indent he left behind. The first time she called, it rang. The second, it didn't. By the fifth attempt, her number was blocked. At first, she told herself he must be busy, buried under board meetings and billion-dollar deals. But by the third day, doubt began to bloom in her chest like a bruise she couldn't locate. A week later, she stood outside the tall glass doors of Cole Enterprises, gripping a thin plastic bag in one hand and a pregnancy test in the other. Her coat was too thin for the wind biting across Manhattan, but she didn't feel it. The receptionist stared at her with polite detachment, the way people do when they're used to watching hope crumble at a front desk. "Mr. Cole is unavailable," she repeated again, eyes skimming over Lena's pale, desperate face without flinching. "He's out of the country. Out of the country. Out of reach. Out of her life." Her mouth opened, then shut. The words caught in her throat like glass. Lena backed away slowly, stepping onto the cold sidewalk with shaking legs, cradling her secret in silence. By that evening, her stomach was tight with nausea, not from the baby, but from betrayal. She tried again the next day, and the next. The man who once kissed her with reverence now treated her existence like a threat to be erased. She hadn't asked for promises, hadn't demanded love, just truth. But instead, she got emptiness. She stared at herself in a diner bathroom mirror that night, whispering over and over, "You matter. You matter. You matter." The lie didn't land. That night, she wandered through the park with nowhere to go. The shelters were full. Her landlord had already taped an eviction notice to her door after a missed rent payment. Her bank balance showed double digits, so she sat alone on a bench under the flickering glow of a broken street lamp, rain misting softly over her shoulders like the sky was apologizing. She held her knees to her chest, rocking slowly, whispering to the child inside her as if it could understand pain. "I loved him," she said, her voice hoarse from silence. "I didn't mean to. God, I didn't mean to." Her hands trembled. "He used me, and I let him. I let him because I thought I could matter to someone like him." Her breath hitched, tears falling warm and silent. "And I loved him." Like a fool. The city moved on around her, horns blaring, strangers passing, no one stopping. Her art supplies were in a backpack she carried like a lifeline. Her phone was silent. No text, no call. No Damien, the man who once claimed she silenced. His noise now ignored her like she was static. She emailed once, a long letter that took hours to write, full of shaking honesty and aching confession. It went unanswered. She sold her tablet to buy prenatal vitamins. She skipped meals to afford bus fare. Shelters gave her bread and blankets, but not warmth. And every morning she sat in public restrooms, weeping into the curve of her elbow, trying not to make noise. She stopped painting. Her colors faded. Her laughter vanished. And when she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize the woman who stared back. Tired eyes, sunken cheeks, a belly just beginning to show. She became invisible, and somehow that hurt more than anything. Weeks passed. Her world grew smaller. Just her, the baby, and silence. The same man who once traced her spine with whispers now acted as if she were a stranger on a crowded street. She passed Cole Enterprises once, stood across from it, looked up at the glittering tower, and whispered, "You won't break me." But her voice cracked at the end, because part of her already was. Her name vanished from his memory like a smudge on glass wiped clean. And she, who once made him feel human, was nothing more than a shadow he refused to see. Lena Monroe disappeared from Damien Cole's world like smoke in a storm. And the cruelest part? He never even noticed. 9 months had passed like a whisper through a locked room. Damien Cole's life had remained as curated and glossy. As a magazine spread crisp suits, tight deals, meaningless dates, he had long forgotten the sound of Lena's laugh. Or at least convinced himself he had. There were no late-night regrets. No thoughts of a girl with paint-stained fingers and a trembling voice. Until that day, that damn day, he wasn't at the hospital for anything dramatic. Just a quick visit to an investor friend recovering from minor surgery. He moved through the pristine white corridors like he owned the building, phone in one hand, mind elsewhere, until panic cracked the sterile air like thunder. A nurse burst from the ER bay, her voice sharp and high with urgency. Emergency blood needed, AB negative, immediate donor required. Her words bounced off the walls like sirens. Without thinking, Damien turned, drawn by something deeper than reflex. "I may be negative," he said, stepping forward. "Take mine." The nurse looked relieved, grabbing his wrist gently but with speed. He didn't ask questions. Damien Cole didn't hesitate, never had. Within minutes, he was on a narrow donor bed, a needle threading into his vein, his blood rushing into a stranger's battle for survival. He glanced to the left, expecting a nameless face, a thankless cause. What he saw instead nearly stopped his heart. Lena, his. Lena, pale, fragile, unconscious, a shadow of the fierce, fiery woman he once touched like poetry. Her hair was matted against her forehead, tubes and wires crawling across her skin like vines of desperation. Her chest rose with effort. Monitors beeped like quiet warnings. But it wasn't just her. Beside her bed stood 2 clear incubators, each holding a crying newborn, wrapped in sterile blankets. No bigger than his forearm, one kicked weakly, the other clenched a fist so tight it trembled. His blood was draining into a bag, but the color left his face completely. He stared, mouth open, every word caught behind a wall of disbelief. What is this?" His voice cracked like ice. The nurse didn't blink. She looked at him with something that might have been pity or judgment. "Those are yours," she said. She named them hope and justice. Silence, deafening. Damien blinked as if reality would reset. "Mine?" he choked. "Mine?" The nurse nodded solemnly. She came in alone, collapsed on a sidewalk. "She wouldn't give us a name for the father. But when we searched her records for a donor match, your name was flagged in the emergency contact system. You were the only AB negative listed under her emergency history. That's the only reason we knew to call you." His stomach twisted violently. He looked at Lena, so still, so fragile, and then at the infants. One yawned as if mocking the silence. He couldn't breathe. Memories slammed into him like waves, her laughter beneath city lights, the way she said his name like it mattered, the warmth of her skin under his, her whispers about never asking for promises. And he had left her, erased her, walked away like she was nothing. He swallowed, a lump rising in his throat that no amount of pride could choke down. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked, more to himself than anyone else. The nurse looked at him, then back at Lena. "Maybe she knew you wouldn't care." The truth stung like the sharp snap of the needle in his vein. The world around him blurred. His body felt heavy. "Is she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The nurse answered anyway. "She's fighting." Her body went into shock after delivery. She gave birth on a bench. We don't know how she made it this long. Damien closed his eyes, guilt flooding him faster than the blood he was donating. Everything he'd ignored, everything he'd erased, was now screaming in front of him. She was more than a memory now. She was the mother of his children. She had bled alone, cried alone, given life alone. And he had gone on living like she never existed. He looked at the babies again. One of them had his nose, the other her eyes. "Hope and justice," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She named them after the only things I never gave her." And for the first time in a decade, Damien Cole felt something unfamiliar and terrifying break inside him. Remorse. Real soul-deep remorse. And love cracked open too late, but not yet gone. The hospital was too quiet. Machines hummed, oxygen whispered, and distant footsteps echoed through sterile corridors. But none of it drowned the storm inside Damien's chest. He sat beside Lena's bed, with his elbows on his knees and his head low, staring at her like he'd only just learned how to see. She looked nothing like the firecracker woman he remembered. No fierce eyes, no curve of laughter on her lips, only exhaustion, sunken cheeks, and the delicate terror of a body stretched beyond breaking. He studied the bruises along her arms, the swelling of her fingers, the mess of hair splayed on her pillow, and felt like a thief beside her, a man who had stolen 9 months of peace from a woman, who had never once asked him for anything but honesty. He watched the rise and fall of her breath, like it was the only proof the universe hadn't punished him with finality. Her skin was pale against the sheets, her frame small, frail, and all he could hear was the echo of her voice from that long-lost night, "I trust you." He hadn't earned it then. He didn't deserve it now. His throat tightened as he whispered into the stillness, barely louder than his own guilt. "Why didn't you come back?" He didn't expect an answer, but her eyelids fluttered. Her lips moved like they were remembering how to form truth. Her voice was sandpaper and sorrow. "Because you never wanted me to." She turned her face slowly, as though the act itself cost more energy than she had. Her eyes didn't meet his. They stared out the window, where the moonlight leaked in pale strips across the linoleum. A single tear slipped from the corner of her eye, tracing a slow path down her temple. She wasn't sobbing. She wasn't screaming. She was simply done. "And I would rather beg on the streets with dignity," she said, her voice thin but sharp, "than beg you to love me." Damien's chest cracked. No contract, no mansion, no empire he had ever built had prepared him for those 12 words. They hit him like a confession and a curse. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally let the shield drop. "But I do," he said. "God, Lena, I do." His voice broke, raw and rough like gravel underfoot. "I didn't know what love was. Not really. Not until I lost it. Not until I saw you here, broken, alone, and I realized everything I ever wanted was what I pushed away." She didn't respond, but her breath hitched, barely. A flicker, enough. "I was afraid," he confessed, more to himself than to her, "of needing you, of not being enough, of being the kind of man you'd look at one day and regret. So I left before you could." He laughed once, bitter, short, hollow. "How pathetic is that? The great Damien Cole, hiding from a woman's love like it was fire." He leaned forward, gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. She flinched, just barely, and his heart sank lower. "I deserve your hate," he murmured. "But I don't want your silence." Her eyes closed again, as if she couldn't bear to hold the weight of his guilt any longer. The monitor beside her beeped steadily, each pulse a reminder she was still here, still reachable, but fragile. And he, for once, didn't reach to fix things with a gesture or a grin. He sat in the wreckage, sat in the silence, sat with her pain like it was penance. "The twins," he whispered, glancing toward the nursery windows just beyond the door. "Hope and justice." He smiled through the ache. "You named them with more faith than I ever gave you." Still no answer, but she didn't ask him to leave, and that in its own way felt like a beginning. Lena was discharged 5 days later, still weak, still stitched with silence. The babies were strong enough to leave the NICU, tucked in her arms like fragile promises. Damien was there at the hospital doors, waiting, not with flowers or apologies, but with quiet eyes and a car seat he didn't know how to fasten. "I'll take you home," he said. "You're not my home," she replied. She walked past him chin high, babies bundled tightly against her chest, dignity wrapped around her like armor. But he didn't leave. He followed at a distance, never pushing, never pleading, just present, day by day, morning by morning, rain or sun. At first she thought it was guilt. Then she realized he was finally learning how to stay. He found her a modest apartment, small but safe, warm, with windows that welcomed the light. She told him she didn't need favors. He said nothing, just quietly paid the deposit and stocked the fridge with groceries she hadn't asked for. Diapers arrived at the door like clockwork, formula, a second-hand crib. Tiny clothes folded with awkward, obvious care. He came by at night not to talk, not to press, but to help. He held Justice when he wouldn't sleep, rocked Hope when she cried until dawn. Lena watched from the hallway once, him in sweatpants, his hair tousled, whispering lullabies to two fragile souls who didn't know he'd once walked away. She wanted to hate him. Some nights she tried, but there he was again, fixing the broken kitchen drawer, replacing a flickering light bulb, burning rice, but laughing like a man who'd never cooked before and wanted to learn, only because she existed. One night after the twins had drifted off, the room filled with soft hums from a white noise machine and the smell of lavender lotion. Lena sat on the edge of the couch and finally let her guard drop for one fragile moment. Her voice, quiet but sharp, cut through the silence. "Why now?" she asked. "After everything?" Damien looked up from the bassinet, his eyes tired but clear. "Because when I gave you my blood," he said slowly, walking toward her, "I felt it. Something I've never felt before. I wasn't just keeping you alive. I realized you'd always kept me alive. I just didn't know it until I saw what life felt like without you in it." His words weren't polished. They weren't smooth. They were honest, and they landed like tremors in the space between them. Lena didn't speak for a while. Her fingers brushed a frayed blanket edge. Her eyes didn't blink. And then, almost too soft to hear, she whispered, "Actions speak louder than blood, Damien." The room held its breath. He didn't argue, didn't rush to defend himself. He sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her, but not so close as to touch. "Then I'll let my actions speak," he said, "for as long as it takes." She turned toward him slowly, her gaze scanning his face like it held both the wound and the remedy. Her heart didn't leap. It didn't swoon. It simply beat with cautious hope. And in that moment, surrounded by tiny breaths and midnight stillness, something shifted, not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. 6 months passed, like pages turning in a story they weren't sure would ever be. Written again, slow, fragile but real. The apartment smelled of warm milk and lullabies, the soft creak of baby toys and late night. Footsteps forming the quiet soundtrack of redemption. Outside it was raining gently, not with fury but with calm, as though the sky itself had softened. Inside, tiny feet wobbled on the hardwood floor. Hope took her first unsure step between the couch and Damien's waiting hands, a squeal of delight escaping her lips as she fell safely against his chest. Beside her, Justice followed with stubborn determination, fists clenched, eyes wide, as if gravity was something he'd learned to defeat. Damien knelt between them, his arms wide, face glowing, laughing in that new, unfamiliar way he'd only discovered since becoming something more than just a man, with money, since becoming a father. He didn't notice Lena at first, leaning in the doorway with her arms folded, a tired smile pulling at her lips as she watched the man she once swore she'd never forgive become the man she couldn't imagine life without. She spoke softly, barely louder than the rain against the glass. "Do you still not believe in love?" Her voice carried the weight of memory and the hope of maybe. Damien looked up, caught in the moment between a question and its consequences. He stood slowly, brushing his fingers through his now softer, less perfect hair and walked toward her, each step deliberate. As if the floor between them held old ghosts he was finally ready to cross. He stopped inches away, rainlight catching in his eyes, no longer hiding. "I believe in you," he said. No hesitation, no practiced charm, just truth. Her eyes shimmered, though no tears fell. "I'm still scared," she admitted, her voice cracking not from weakness but from honesty. "So am I," he whispered, taking her hand with the same reverence one might offer a prayer. "But I'm not running." "Not anymore. I've already lived without you. I won't survive that again." There were no fireworks, no grand declarations, only the kind of quiet that meant everything. He lifted her hand to his chest, pressing it against the steady beat of his heart, as if to show her that love, real love, could be consistent. Her fingers curled into his shirt, not pulling him closer, but anchoring herself to something that no longer felt like a lie. Outside, the rain deepened, soft thunder rolling through the clouds like an old song. The twins squealed behind them, toppling over into a pile of stuffed animals and baby giggles, and Lena laughed through her tears, a sound Damien hadn't heard in months, and one he never wanted to stop hearing again. He kissed her then, not hungrily, not desperately, but reverently, as a man who had broken something sacred and spent every day since learning how to put it back together without rushing the glue to dry. Their lips met in silence, not like lovers reuniting, but like a family finally beginning. The kiss was a breath shared, a chapter turned, a door opened with cautious hope. And in that small apartment, with rain outside and warmth inside, two souls that had been shattered by betrayal and sharpened by time finally settled into something whole. There were still nights ahead that would bring fear, still arguments, still memories that would ache like old bruises. But love didn't promise the absence of pain, only the presence of someone willing to stay through it. As they stood wrapped in each other, the twins crawling toward them like tiny anchors to this new, imperfect life, Lena whispered into his chest, "You're not who I thought you were." Damien smiled softly. "I know, but maybe now I'm who I was supposed to become." And somewhere in the hush of that little home, the world outside faded away. Because sometimes blood saves lives, but love saves souls.